Good morning as usual, and good afternoon too. We had a break, and we thank God that we can come again and continue from where we left. It is proper for us to begin work with prayer. Thank you, our Father, for another opportunity like this, that your children can meet again to continue the teaching, learning, and enterprise that you have given to us. You are the master teacher, and when you teach, we will understand. And so come to our aid and teach through your servant, the chosen instrument, and grant that your students will understand and use the principles therein gathered to help improve themselves and make their teaching edifying to the children that they teach. We thank you for answered prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Usually we start our day's work with a gem, a truth that we can live with. And today, one man who impresses me very much, not for anything, but how he began schooling and how he ended, all because of a teacher. According to him, life is a gift, and if we accept it, we must contribute in return. When we fail to contribute, we fail to answer the question why we are here. And so he adds that imagination, therefore, is more important than knowledge. This is Albert Einstein. Days gone by, we have been looking at theories of learning. And with this, we have been put in a place where, as teachers, we know why children learn or do not learn, the challenges that as teachers we face as we prepare or as we teach. And so from this theoretical base, we are moving to the practice of it. And so today our topic is teaching. And if our topic is teaching, where have I brought something from Albert Einstein, who is not known to have been a teacher, as we know so many educators like John Dewey. Albert Einstein was not a teacher, but his life encourages us because why? He was written off by the school in the United States. He was written off. Albert was written off because his teachers who handled him first time did not see any good, any potential. So he was written off and asked to go back and stay home until a teacher found him. I repeat that. Until a teacher found him and put him back to school. In other words, as teachers, we should be able to imagine. Albert Einstein says that imagination is more important than knowledge. Imagine in your children what they can become. And that is the potential. If as teachers we are not able to unearth the potentials embedded in the children who sit in front of us, then we have not been teachers. So with this gem, our objective for this phase of our deliberation is that by the end of this, students should be able to state clearly and sincerely whether they have been teaching or they have been wasting the time of students or pupils. Be candid, be free, but don't dodge. State clearly after this discussion to find whether you are a professional teacher teaching, or you are a professional teacher by name wasting the time of children and writing off pupils and students that they are good for nothing. And so, we want to look at first what people have said about teaching. What are some of the definitions people have given to teaching as an activity? Now, we will go according to some of these definitions, that teaching is an ability undertaken by professionals. So it is a rational as well as a humane activity in which the teacher uses his or her creativity, imagination, and professional knowledge to promote learning and the welfare of his or her students or pupils. Now let us go back. Why is it a rational and humane activity? Humane. Rational because it is deliberate. It is intentional. Humane because teachers deal with human beings who have minds, who have emotions. And so if we take the humanness from the activity of teaching, it ceases to be teaching. When we get to the principles of teaching, I will come back to this humane aspect of teaching. Creativity. And so we will go to answer why people think that teaching is an art. Others also think teaching is a science. And so the teacher's creativity is very important. The teacher's imagination is very important because it goes a long way to help him or her to imagine the end product. That is why the other day we started by saying that as teachers, we do not draw on canvas. We are not sculptors bringing about great work of art. We draw on the minds of people, and so we imagine what they can become after we have drawn on their minds and hearts. Teaching is a means whereby an experienced member, you the professional teacher is the experienced member, and of a group of people, they guide, they direct the inexperienced member or members, these are the students, guide them in their growth and of their development. So if there is this means where a teacher who is the experienced member of the group directs the students in terms of their growth and development, teaching is going on there. And therefore teaching can be seen as a system of actions intended to induce learning. Any action, the end result of which is learning, is teaching. Teaching, therefore, is an interpersonal influence aimed at changing the way or ways in which persons will behave. That is why you state your objective and you say by the end of the lesson, the student will be able to, that is behavior, to do something. We will come to that when we come to instructional statements as regards setting an objective to teach. Teaching is an activity aimed at the achievement of learning. Learning and the activity is practiced in such a manner as to respect the student's intellectual integrity and capacity. Teachers go to teach and they think that their students don't know anything. I once supervised a student who was teaching a class, primary 3, and it was an aspect of social studies, types of musical instruments. That was the topic. And the teacher had done well by bringing various types of drums into the classroom. There was the classification, the membranophones, the idiophones, the chordophones, and the rest. It was an interesting class. At the end of the class, post-evaluation, he called some of the people and asked if any of them could do the drumming practicals. And some students surged forward. The one who said he could play the tumpine was with the tumpine. The pentima was there, the fritua, all that. They don't know. And so he asked the group, what type of ensemble do you want to play? He said, oh, the Adwa ensemble. So he called, how many of you can dance? Then some girls and some boys also came forward. And then the teacher said, okay, Atumpine, give us the rhythm. Then one boy raised the hand. Say, madam, it is not the Atumpine that gives the rhythm, it is the fritua. What point am I making? It is an activity aimed at the achievement of learning, and it is practiced in such a manner as to respect the student's intellectual integrity and capacity. The teacher had assumed that the children didn't know the Adwa ensemble, so he was going to direct, but he was corrected that in this ensemble it is not the Atumpine that gives the rhythm. It is the ko, that. So as teachers, as you go to the class, don't assume that your pupils don't know anything and you are going to give it to them. That is wrong. And so, as teachers, this man, John Dewey, looking at teaching, made a comparison. He believes that anywhere there is teaching, there should be learning. And so he compared teaching and learning to selling, which is to buying. According to Dewey, if anybody says, I sold 2 baskets of oranges, but nobody bought them, I sold 2 buckets of oranges, but nobody bought them. Similarly, no teacher, the teacher cannot say, I taught some people, but none or nobody learned. Then you didn't teach. Because in as much as selling goes with buying, anytime somebody says, I sold, somebody has bought the goods. So when I say, I say, I have taught, I must believe that someone has learned. And that is why R.S. Peters refers to teaching as having educated an individual. That is, if you say, I have educated him or her, it means I have brought the learner to a higher level of experience. That is what R.S. Peters says, that teaching according to him, if my teaching brings you as my students to a level of experience, then I have taught you. So if my teaching and your teaching does not yield to any change in a person's behavior, then effective teaching has not taken place. Because he believes that for a purposeful teaching, every teacher must know his or her objectives. And by the end of the lesson, the product what we emphasize to pass on, which we shall discuss when we are writing instructional objectives, that should take place after I or you have taught. And that is why we have types of teaching. We have analytic teaching. Analytic because as teachers, we cannot afford wasting the time and resources of the children of the school. So because we don't want anything to be wasted, we do analytic teaching by putting all resources, all things at our disposal together, all geared to effecting proper teaching and proper learning, effective teaching and effective learning. Now with this in mind, we get into phases of teaching. We believe that teaching is a process, and the phase of teaching, not F-A-C-E but P-H-A-S-E-S, phases. Teaching has 4 main phases. We have the curriculum plan phase, and the curriculum plan phase has to do with the syllabus, the scheme of work, the syllabus or syllabi that I have asked you to go and find. Depending on your area, your course area, if it is social studies, go and find the syllabus that goes with the senior high school social studies syllabus. And it is applicable to all the other groups. I said it the other time. The scheme of work, your lesson plan, which is an extended scheme of work. We have the instructional phase, which is the second phase. We have the measuring phase, the third phase, and we have the evaluating phase. We will take them one after the other. Planning phase. There are some necessities, things that we need. It is important to know, one, the aims of education in general. Why is the government of Ghana spending a chunk of its budget on education? Because Ghana has an aim as a country. Why are you teaching as a teacher? And that will give us educational aims, the national aims for the country, the goals set by the country. What are your own objectives as a teacher, your goal as a teacher? Why? Do you have one? Do I have one? So in the planning phase, we ask all these questions as necessities. There are materials that we need to think about at the planning phase of teaching. The syllabus that I have talked about. What are the textbooks to be used? What is the subject matter around which you are planning? Selecting your subject matter is a way of finding material. Grading, because after teaching you are going to grade. Are you going to teach from known to the unknown? Which one is preceding and which one is following? Are you going to use repetition? How are you going to evaluate after teaching? All these come when you are planning to go to teach. And so at the planning stage, you need to take all this into consideration. How about the instructional phase? At the instructional phase, what do? We create instructional strategies and tactics to achieve the aims and the goals or the objectives that we have set. And as we instruct, we modify our materials to suit the child. Let me expand that. Use of TLMs. You have prepared materials that you are going to use to teach. When you get to the classroom, you might not even use those ones that you prepared at home. Probably you might use chalkboard or whatever illustrations. Why? Because the situation that you found yourself calls for modifying the materials or even doing some other things that are new. You prepare TLMs, they are appropriate, but where in the course or when in the course of the teaching are you going to introduce them? So in supervision we find some students, they have prepared TLMs, but they introduce them at the wrong time of the teaching process. And that makes ineffective, inappropriate. So we must know the type of TLM you have prepared, the time you are introducing it, and why you are introducing that TLM. We are saying again at the instructional phase, that is where you are using your imagination and you are thinking to be creative so that we can make our students learn. Because of this, in instructional phase, some of the things that we do are direct strategies. The direct strategies include the teacher talking, using demonstrations, gestures to present to students what is being taught. So teachers cannot go to class and stand static at one place. Teachers use demonstrations, gestures, the movement of the eye to eye with their children or their students, all geared to helping their students to understand what they are teaching. At this same stage, the direct strategy, we organize teaching into short steps. And that is why you go through procedure 1, procedure 2, 3, until you are finished. And you allow students to ask questions along the line about what is being presented. And so at the end of each step, you are pausing for students to ask for clarification before you move to the next. So the teacher asks questions to check students' understanding from step to step. One thing also that is more important is in interactive strategies, direct, is the teacher's voice must be very direct and clear. You want to explain a concept. You take time, and clarity is very important when it comes to explaining something. So the teacher's voice, let me say again, must be direct and clear. In this same interactive strategies, you ensure that groups are well organized, and that is streaming, putting children into groups. They are well organized, and each group is receiving the necessary attention from the teacher. Don't just put students into groups and ignore them, because you want to ensure maximum participation or involvement from the students. Conclude your lesson in an appropriate manner. What are some of the means by which you conclude your lesson? Because you want to give a summary, you can summarize the main points of your lesson. Because it is a privilege of a professional teacher. Being privileged, it is also your responsibility to promote teaching and learning. And so you are finding ways that after you have done what you have done, you are allowing pupils or students to come out boldly after your summary, which is a way of ending your lesson, or using questions to get feedback, to elicit feedback from the students you have taught. And that also is a way of ending your lesson. Very interesting. So it is important that as professional teachers we promote learning as we teach. The measuring phase is the next. And this is another phase, another step in the teaching enterprise. But how do we measure whether students have learned or have grasped what has been taught? We can use the following: questions, tests, exercises, oral or written exams. We can use these as a means of measuring what we have taught pupils or children or students. Now, testing, whether we like it or not, periodic testing serves as motivation for students to work hard. I always, in my teaching, use myself as an illustration. Periodic testing. Students don't want mock exams, but when we are tested, quizzes, class tests, according to our discussion, it serves as motivation, because in test 1, out of 10 you had 4. In test 2, out of 10 you had 5. You realize that when you compare with others, others are having either 7 over 10, 8 or 9 over 10. So you are motivated that if you don't work hard, your grade, your class is going to be affected. And so it motivates you to study hard. It also directs student learning. A student who has come to learn, when he or she is periodically tested, he or she is directed in his or her learning. Because it makes students aware of success and failure. And this leads to how the learner learns how to learn. So, as periodically students are tested, your pupils are tested, and the feedback is given to them, they realize that they should back up and study hard. On the part of the teacher, you and I, periodic testing also tests how we are being either effective, whether we are failing or succeeding as teachers. Because when we get the feedback from our pupils or our students, it puts us in a position to assess ourselves. Are we making it? Are we teaching or wasting the time of the children? You go to stand in the class and all that you are saying, you say something, do you see? You say another thing, do you see? Do you understand? The children will respond, we don't see anything. So teach scientifically, because initially there was a question that we have not answered. Is teaching an art or teaching is a science? When I have done with the evaluative phase, which is the 4th phase, I will come back to that and see if teaching really is an art or a science. It is the step in the teaching enterprise that seeks to review all activities done with students to see whether the teacher has failed or not, the evaluative phase. Remember, the measuring phase results in hand whether objectives were achieved. First of all is appropriateness, the measuring phase. So combining the measuring phase with the evaluative phase, you realize that the measuring phase result, whether this has been achieved. First of all, what I did, was it appropriate? Was it suitable? You, the teacher, did you use what was appropriate to help the students to learn? Was it suitable, the suitability of the subject matter? Remember, we went through Piaget, and by his theory, we should teach according to the cognitive levels of the children. So were they appropriately selected subject matter? Very suitable? Were they high above or below the students' cognitive levels, ability levels, intellectual levels? So at the evaluative phase, the teacher can judge. Judge what? The effectiveness of his or her instructional strategy and the tactics that he used. So at the evaluating phase, let me say again, the teacher can judge the effectiveness of the instructional strategy and the tactics used. Note, however, that teaching will not always proceed as planned. You sit and you plan your 4 stages of teaching. Don't forget, it is not something that is cast in stone. And so you go to 1, 2, 3, 4. That is not how it is. It dovetails, so you know the dovetail. 1 gets into 2, 2 is getting into 3, and so don't forget that teaching will not always proceed as planned. You plan to discuss something, you go, the moment you brought your RPK, you assumed that children knew something and you realize that they don't. You will not stay and say that because I have said this, I will do it despite the revelation that has come to hit you. And so at the evaluative stage, the teacher has to ask some searching questions. And some of the questions are as follows. Was the interest of the class aroused? That is why introduction of a lesson is very important. Was the subject matter relevant and students motivated to learn? Were objectives of the instructions made clear to learners? Was new work linked with the old? So relevant previous knowledge is very important there, the new and the old. Was there any appropriate teaching? Were appropriate TLMs used, illustrations used to make clear the material presented? Was the presentation done in a logical, systematic manner? Did the teacher allow sufficient time for each session, the stage or the steps of the delivery? Were students tested to ensure that the lesson materials were assimilated? That is why the assessment must be ongoing. We have assessment for, assessment of. So the teacher must know in each of this that as we teach, we assess. Students' participation. Was the class properly controlled? And did the teacher see to it that all students who were at the hearing point of his or her voice participate in the lesson? Were students encouraged? Were they encouraged by the teacher, by his or her teaching? Was the interaction very dull? Was the lesson delivery fluent, clear? No ambiguities? Did all or majority of the students learn what was taught? The teacher must be asking all such searching questions at the evaluative stage, because there is an assumption. There is an assumption based on evaluation. Why do we evaluate? We evaluate because the teacher is a professional who is capable of making decisions regarding the teaching activity. If I am a teacher, you are a teacher, and we cannot make decisions regarding the teaching process, what am I going to use? My subject matter. Is it too broad, so I break it into a subhead? If the teacher cannot do this, then he is not a professional teacher. The primary purpose of teaching is to facilitate students' learning, and that is why we must evaluate their learning. Students' learning can be measured only through observations that reveal changes in their behavior. That is why in our setting of objectives we said by the end of the lesson, this will be the behavior. At least the children will be able to explain clearly in their own words, blah, blah, blah. That is observable behavior. Again, the act of teaching, because it is a complex process which is influenced by a field of forces which in many variety of ways the teacher cannot control, but he has to do something to help his or her students. He can only impart, be aware of the fact that the teacher can partially control. For example, if a child is naturally dull, there are some forces controlling, and you find it difficult to deal with this. But as a teacher, you are assuming, that is the assumption, that you will come to a point in time where, try as you may, you are not getting through. That is one assumption also. Teachers should also use objectives that are evident about the teaching and its effect on students' learning to evaluate their own teaching. What objective did you set at the onset? As we prepare to evaluate, we must go back to the objective that we set, because we should be guided by the objectives so that we can do an objective evaluation of our students. Now, so far we have been able to go through teaching. We have gone through definitions of teaching. We have gone through some other people who have compared teaching to some other activities, especially John Dewey, who has compared teaching and learning to buying and selling. And we are saying that anywhere teaching goes on, learning also goes on. And so, like Albert Einstein, who was found by a teacher on the line, if we are teachers, we would teach any type of child who has been brought to us. And so, is teaching an art or science? You may have heard people, and it's true, people often say that he is a born teacher. Yes, that person has not been trained at a college of education or university, but you see him or her, the way the person handles children, the way the person handles his subject matter, controls the class. This teacher is a born one. He is made. And people, that school of thought, think that teaching is an art, creativity there. But that is true to some extent. Teaching is a science in as much as it is guided by empirical evidence. And that is why when you were in level 200, you were taken through educational psychology. So that from the empirical studies of psychologists, you will be guided by the theories thereby. And as much as we lean towards the guidance of principles that have come to us from educational psychology and some other areas of endeavor, we conclude that teaching is a science more than an art, because we lean so much on empirical evidence. For example, this child who is dark, There should be an empirical evidence underlying the child's dullness, so the teacher can use that information to help the dull child. So teaching now, we conclude, is more of science than of art. So, if teaching is science, I'm going to ask a question, and then we will start another session by answering that question. Should the teacher prepare before going to teach? Should you, as a teacher? I am at the university, so they will say lecturer. The College of Education, they say tutor. The senior high school is master. The basic school is teacher. We are all teachers. It doesn't matter what level of the educational superstructure you are operating at the university, at the college, at the senior high, at the JSS, at the primary, at the KG. We are all teachers. And so the question is, should the teacher prepare? Is it necessary, the teacher's preparation? Should the teacher plan the structure of what he or she intends to teach? These are the questions that we will answer in our second session, the title of which is the teacher's preparation.